I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
A wide-ranging Emerson College poll just came out to close out the year, and it covers really everything from the looming TikTok ban to the murder of the United Healthcare CEO, everything in between. But it does cover crypto, so why don't we start there? You took the temperature on crypto. What did you find?
Yeah, we found that about 1 in 5 voters have actually invested in or traded cryptocurrency. So, the vast majority, 81%, have not. It's interesting that among crypto users, only about 60% have ever used crypto to buy something, whether it's goods or services. Thought that was an interesting number. And then when we dig a little bit deeper, we see that actually some of these minority voters have higher rates of usage than white voters. So, for instance, 31% of Hispanic voters, 31% of Black voters say that they have invested in or traded crypto, 34% of Asian voters, whereas just 14% of white voters say the same thing.
And when you're looking at crypto specifically and the 2024 voter, does it seem like more Republicans or more Trump voters are using crypto opposed to Democrats and Harris voters?
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a Trump bent. We can see that 57% of crypto users have a favorable view of Donald Trump. We also see that men are twice as likely to say that they've invested in or traded crypto, about 26% versus 13% for women. That's obviously more Trump-friendly demographic. So you definitely see a bit of a breakdown there. It might be confirming some stereotypes among some, and it might be breaking some among others with ethnic minorities. I don't think necessarily folks expected that.
I think that stereotype you might be referring to is the crypto bro. But how old is this crypto bro did you find? Do they lean younger? Are older people more skeptical of this? What does that look like?
Yeah, it is by and large a young person's game here. I think folks who are under the age of 50 are roughly twice as more likely to use cryptocurrency. That's about a third of these voters under the age of 50. So, it is certainly still, more skewed towards younger folks. So I think it does kind of confirm that crypto bro stereotype, but it is definitely more diverse within there than some may have anticipated.
I now want to move on to tariffs because Donald Trump, who's president-elect, he will be in office in a month from tomorrow, did say that he will be imposing tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China. Economists have told me that these tariffs will not be good for the economy, but what do voters, what do Americans think when you guys asked them what they think about tariffs?
Yeah, voters largely agree with those economists. So, 49% say that tariffs on Chinese goods will hurt the US economy. 50% said the same for Mexican goods and 51% for Canadian goods. Only about 32 to 39% say that these tariffs are going to help the economy. We do see that Trump voters are more likely to say that tariffs will help the economy, about 69% there, whereas 79% of Harris voters say that tariffs will hurt the economy.
It's really interesting, Matt, because for months leading up to November 5th, you and I have talked about how the economy continued to be the biggest issue facing voters. And now these tariffs, by and large, people are saying that this will hurt the economy. When you look at different demographics, whether it be age or race, do you see anything that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I think that those sort of partisan numbers, as far as age and race goes, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but those partisan numbers are important. And I think, we also see that majorities of independents say that tariffs are going to hurt the economy still being the top issue here in this survey.
President Biden has one more month left in office. And you and I have talked, like I said, for months leading up to the election, as voters are well, or as viewers rather, are well aware. And this was a election. It was a referendum on the status quo. President Biden, even though he wasn't the candidate, his administration was voted out. What is his approval rating as we sit here right now, 1 month until he's out of office?
Yeah, so I think that several things have factored into this, and we can get into that in a minute. But we see fairly historic lows. It is very close to the historic low in our polling for Biden's approval rating. We see 36% approve, 54% disapprove. That is about as bad as it can get. And again, we'll look a little deeper into some why this might be the case, but President Biden's administration is deeply unpopular right now.
Well, let's look a little deeper. Why is that the case? Because when you're saying that this is unprecedented, this is as low as it can go, what are the factors here? Why is it as low as it can go?
Well, in this poll, we tested the President Biden's decision to pardon his son, Hunter Biden. We find that that is not a popular move. 52% oppose that decision, just 28% support. Now, a majority of Democrats do support that, 56%, but the overwhelming majority of Republicans are against it, 82%. And then when you look at independents, they are also in opposition, 53%. I think combined with the economic numbers, that were fresh out of the election, and then with this deeply unpopular move, it's sort of easy to see why President Biden's numbers keep ticking lower and lower.
And President Biden isn't the only one with some controversial pardons. President-elect Donald Trump has said that he would pardon January 6th rioters when he gets into office. What do voters think about that?
Yeah, so that hypothetical, I suppose, for the time being, pardon, it is also not popular among the electorate, not quite as bad as the Hunter Biden pardon. About 50% oppose pardoning the January 6th rioters, 34% support, and then a further 16% aren't sure. A majority of Republicans do support it, 60%, and then 82% of Democrats are opposed to that.
When you're looking at President Biden's approval, does any demographic stick out to you? Because as we noted back in November in the election, almost every demographic swayed more Republican than in elections past. Donald Trump made grounds with and gains with almost every demographic. So is anything interesting there?
Yeah, so his approval rating is very similar to what we saw last month. Very, very much underwater, continuing a downward trend that we've seen since before the election, but especially after the election. We're seeing, frankly, some what I'd call melt everywhere. There's no one demographic that he's losing, but we do see that among some of these minority voters, some of these younger voters, and even among Democrats, folks who say that they are partisan Democrats. We're seeing his approval tick down across the board. So I don't think that there's any one demographic I could point to and say, that's where his problem is. I think that, he's the outgoing president now. He might not be concerned with his approval rating at this point, and frankly, I wouldn't blame him. But he's seeing melt everywhere, and it is certainly affecting his approval rating across the board.
Man, I do want to take a hard left turn now because earlier this month, in Midtown Manhattan, the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was shot in cold blood. And since his murder, there's really been this almost celebration of the suspected killer, Luigi Mangione, on social media. And this people taking delight in this killing has really moved from the fringes and the dark shadows of the internet to almost mainstream, almost jokes and memes all over the internet. So Emerson College polling asked about this killing. What do people think about the situation?
Right. So this did make quite a few headlines. Obviously, the killing itself, but then also the results of this poll. And so I do want to talk about this. So, we tested the extent to which folks find the killing acceptable or unacceptable. And 68% of voters say that the killing was either somewhat or completely unacceptable. Just 17% say that it was acceptable in some form, and then 16% were sort of unsure or neutral. We saw a strong correlation with age here. So just 10% of voters age 70 plus say that the killing was either somewhat or completely acceptable. And then we see that 20, dropping down in a few age brackets, we see that 23% of those age 30 to 39 found it acceptable in some form. Then looking at that youngest demographic, where I think a lot of folks have focused, they are split. They say that 40% of them say that the killing was unacceptable, whereas 41% say that it was acceptable, 19% neutral. So again, I think it's worth emphasizing here. The vast majority say that the killing was unacceptable. There are some who are sort of on the fence or maybe don't want to stake out an opinion on it, but it's a minority among voters overall who say that the killing was acceptable.
And can you break it down by party lines? Is there one type of voter, a Democrat or Republican, who would lean more into saying this is more acceptable than maybe another type of voter?
There is a slight party split here. 22% of Democrats say that it was acceptable. But again, the vast majority, 59%, say that the killing was unacceptable, either somewhat or completely. And then when you look at Republicans, they're 12% say that it was acceptable. And then with independents, 16%, again, majority saying that it was unacceptable. So it's much less of a split than it is with some of those younger voters, but we do see a little bit of a partisan divide there.
Matt, this is a really shocking conversation because I do live in Manhattan, where that hotel was where Brian Thompson was killed, is right in Midtown Manhattan. And especially during the holiday season, I mean, it's packed usually. I know this was earlier in the morning, but have you ever polled a question where a murder, what people found it acceptable or not? Because the conversation right away after this murder wasn't one of mourning a loss or shock. It was more so of celebrating what people called almost a Robin Hood vigilante move, which clearly it was a murder.
Yeah, and I think the majority of folks agree with you. We haven't polled anything like this before necessarily. It's a little bit unprecedented. We did take a look earlier this year at some of the effects of the assassination attempts on President Trump. But again, we didn't test it in this sort of form. We saw those conversations online. We did want to test it in such a way that we could gauge, how, how are these conversations that folks are seeing online? Is that really what folks are thinking in real life? And by and large, we found that that's not the case. A lot of these online conversations that are either glorifying or excusing the actions of the killer, that's not necessarily reflecting reality. We see that in those top line numbers. We especially see it among basically anyone over the age of 30. It's really just that 18 to 29 demographic where we see a split. Again, opinion is split there, and take that what you will. But I would not necessarily see that as indicative of any wider movement or that there's approval across the country. That is just not the case.
Well, I think it is comforting to know that most of the time, per usual, what you see online is not reality. Speaking of what you see online, I do want to talk about TikTok. Unless TikTok separates from its parent company, ByteDance, the app will be banned in the United States starting in the middle of January. The Supreme Court will be deciding the TikTok's fate right before the ban is scheduled to be put into effect. What do people think about the ban here in the United States?
Yeah, so we find that a plurality support the ban, 40% versus 30% who are opposed, and then 30% who aren't sure one way or the other. We see a similar split here that we did with the previous question. Younger voters here being a little bit of an outlier. They're the most opposed with 50%. They are opposed overall, just 34% in support of that ban. And as you continue along the age categories, you see that same sort of trend line. So voters age 30 to 49 are split almost evenly with opposition growing as you get to that 50 to 59 demographic, some of those middle-aged voters. And then voters over the age of 60 are overall in support of the ban. 43%, only about 13% in opposition.
And now I finally want to move on to 2028. I know you and I have just wrapped up talking about 2024, but now we're already looking to the future. We're looking 4 years ahead. And let's start with Democrats because Democrats have told me, have said by and large, we need to do some soul searching here. We need to change our strategy as we look at the results of 2024 and move onward. After some reflection, who are some of the top names being floated around to lead the party to maybe herald this change?
Yeah, so you might recall last month we decided to ask an open-ended question of, you know, likely Democrat and Republican primary voters, who would they like to see as the nominee in 2028? And we got a lot of different responses. Most people aren't really sure. Granted, it is very early. We've got a good 4 years here, 3 years until any sort of votes are cast. Uh, so, again, very early, but we did want to test some of the names that are floating out there, some of the names that we saw in those results. So I think I'll start with Mark Cuban. I think that's one of the most interesting ones. Um, he was not among the most listed in last month's poll. So when Democrats are thinking of someone they would like to see as a nominee, he's not necessarily the first one who comes to mind. But we decided to test him anyway because he's very active on social media. He has a big presence, and frankly, he could fund a presidential run. So he is among the best known of the candidates, and he's also among some of the most liked. So 35% have a favorable view of him overall, 10% have never heard of him. And he leads in favorability with independents, 33%. And he even picks up 28% favorability among Republicans. I think that there's something to be said for that. As you said, there is a good bit of Democratic soul searching going on. And I think looking at those numbers, you want someone who has some cross appeal here. Um, if we want to look next at how about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? So she is also one of the best known candidates here. Only 14% have never heard of her, but she only racks up 29% favorability. She's also the most polarizing. So 54% of Democrats have a favorable opinion of her, but 64% of Republicans have an unfavorable view. Independents are also overall unfavorable, 45%. I think that we mostly expected to see that. She is a bit of a polarizing character in Democratic politics, even among Democrats. So not a huge surprise there. We also tested Pete Buttigieg, 34% favorability, 15% have never heard of him. And Gavin Newsom, sort of similar, 29% favorable, 15% have never heard of. And then Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer. Folks were less aware of those two potential candidates, and opinion on them was relatively split.
What about Republicans? Because as we know, in 4 years, Donald Trump will have served 2 terms. His reign will be over, so someone else will be leading the Republican Party. Who do Americans want?
Well, right now, I think if Republicans had their choice, they'd probably say 4 more years of Trump. He has the highest favorability here, 51% versus 45% unfavorable, with independents split evenly. But looking a little bit further down, we see Vance. He's at 41% favorable, 41% unfavorable. I think there's perfectly respectable favorability there. He's well known, and those numbers are mostly split among party lines. Otherwise, we haven't really waded into that Republican side, apart from testing Elon Musk, who would be ineligible for the presidency. But right now, I think Vance is certainly in a good position if he decided to run in 2028.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for the wide-ranging poll. We certainly learned a lot today. Matt Taglia of Emerson College Polling, thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to many conversations in the new year.
Thanks so much, Brittany.